Hi everyone, we are starting on a new unit. The new unit is reading The Great Gatsby, and we are also going to be watching the movie. But of course, before we start reading and watching, we're going to need to know a little bit about that time period first. So prepared you this little video, and this is the type of dancing that people did before the type of dances you do now. And at the time, this was a very scandalous type of dancing, very naughty, and it was banned. It's just mostly people twisting, throwing their arms up in the air. It wasn't really so much of the dancing as it was the fashion and how close people got together, I suppose. So, what was so attractive about this time period that we still, do theme parties and stuff on the 1920s? Well, because there were a lot of changes going on at the time. So you are going to be following along with your Cornell notes, all right? And you're going to go ahead and write the essential question: how did World War I affect modern writing? Because of World War I, a lot of people were sent off to war. Especially young men were drafted towards the closer to the end of the war, 1917. All right, and women had to pick up some of the work at home in the United States while the men were off overseas. So when the war ended and the men came back from war, the genders found it to be very difficult to regain normalcy. What that meant was the women, now that they had a taste of what they can do outside of the home, they want to continue to work instead of being homemakers. And you're just going to be writing some of this stuff that's in yellow in your notes. So because of this change, we see that the younger generation no longer have the same values, especially those traditional values that the older generation has. And we see this with pretty much every generation. For example, the younger generation now is bringing away from generation of mine. So more and more, cell phone usage, social media usage, things like that. This type of change happens all the time. In the 1920s, though, it was such a big change that, and particularly for women, that people were really noticing the trend of change. In fact, F. Scott Fitzgerald, who is the author of the book that we're going to be reading, he noticed and made comments about it. He said that a flapper is lovely, expensive, and about 19. So these type of women were young, they were made up well, so they would put on really great makeup, and they're expensive in a way that if you want to get with them, you better be willing to spend the money. So you can look at some of these pictures. A lot of these fashions were really new at the time. So shorter hair, really dark makeup. You can see the eyes, very strictly done around the eyes there, very thin eyebrows, very thick lipstick, and look at these pearls. Look at the sleeveless dress, very scandalous. Those nails though, all right. And then this was the other type of flapper. So a lot of people, when they think of flapper, they're thinking, oh look, this woman who's very made up. But the flapper also includes women who were really interested in educating themselves. So we can see that she is reading a newspaper, and she also has, a cigarette in the mouth area. All right. So, and she's also wearing these galoshes. This is where these women get their names. They're always wearing these shoes unbuckled. So when they're walking, they're clickety-clacketing up and down the streets. All right. So, of course, older people would be looking at this woman and being like, oh no, what has society become? Flappers' fashion included wearing shorter dresses, having bob haircut, not wearing a corset or very constricting underwear, makeup that was unheard of, rouge, eyeliner, powder, and lipstick. The behavior was astounding to the older people. Girls drinking, girls smoking, girls driving, girls dancing inappropriately, flashback to that shimmy from earlier. And we see that, you know, this is really where the first wave of feminism really came about. All right, so we see that even the newspapers and magazines at the time were really picking up on this trend. They say that the foxtrot and the shimmy, that all this type of dancing, it makes all the dances look like it's bedlam, it's chaotic, it's like wild. All right, so at this time, other dark things that were going on besides women wanting more women's rights were people who were really offended and angry about this 18th Amendment to the Constitution. And this 18th Amendment to the Constitution that was enacted in 1920 said that people cannot sell or buy alcohol. All right? And as we know, when you make a restriction on fun things like that, people are going to be like finding ways around it. All right? So that's where we got the mob, the Al Capone era, bootleggers, speakeasies, all of these type of like kind of underground organizations basically taking over this big business, all right? And they brewed alcohol in their bathtubs and their speakeasies and sold it that way, just kind of underground. Of course, eventually the government was like, oh, maybe that was a bad idea. So they repealed this law and ended it by 1933. So the writer, a little bit more about the writer. He was born in 1896. He died in 1940. So he is really known to be a very important modern literature writer because his writing is very fragmented. There's a lot of time jumps, lots of flashbacks. And that's what this modern writing is kind of like, because after the war, people, including writers, really kind of try to think about why there is so much destruction, fragmentation in the world. So they try to capture it in their writing too. He was also the one who coined this era, the Jazz Age, because people really liked listening to jazz at the time. And he also fell in love with this very beautiful girl named Zelda Sire. And they got married, even though she didn't really like him at first because she thought he was a little bit too poor, and you can kind of see a little bit of that in The Great Gatsby too. But they did get married eventually when he got published, so basically she was kind of a flapper herself. They had a lot of troubles in their relationship. Fitzgerald was an alcoholic. Zelda was schizophrenic, which means that she had this mental disorder that made her like hallucinatory and maybe a little bit paranoid a lot of the time. And basically, because of his alcoholism and Zelda's medical bills, they were always in financial trouble despite him being a pretty successful writer. When he wrote The Great Gatsby, he really met his success. So the story of The Great Gatsby is really about this guy named Gatsby. He's super rich. This is the type of house that he owned with this big old swimming pool in New York, Long Island, very expensive place to live. And it's actually, this inspiration is based on a real place. And it is a couple of years ago, it was actually up for sale for not as much as you'd think it would. I don't quite remember the number exactly, but I think maybe if some of us got together, maybe we can buy the house together and have a summer home, I guess. That would be neat. Parts of the book has a fictional setting, East Egg and West Egg. So you can see that East Egg is right here, West Egg is right here. And it's really based on the geography of Long Island, which is kind of across little bit of the water from Manhattan. All right, so you'll see that some of the real places in New York will be mentioned in the book. All right, so of course during the 1920s, people were all like, yay, America is great, we have so much money and all that stuff. And then what happens next is in the 1930s, they realized that they were really partying too much and spending a lot of money because the Great Depression hit, and they were like, oh my gosh, maybe we shouldn't have been wasting all of our money in the previous decade. All right, so that's the end of the slideshow. And you are going to be asking me for your verbal quiz, but after that, you're going to be working on this activity on Google Classroom. All right, it basically has you looking for a couple of these terms that we'll be seeing in The Great Gatsby, and it would be a good idea for you to know what some of that stuff meant. So what you are going to do is you're going to tell me a little bit about that term and try to find a picture from Google Images. All right, so your first term is bond business. I'm going to help you right with that real quick. You're just going to Google bonds 1920s, all right, or bond business 1920s, basically whatever the term is, you can add 1920s to it. And I'm just going to choose one of these pictures, all right, and I will just copy and paste it into this little box. And if you look up what bonds are, it's basically a way for, oh, you see that there's a little sites here for Gatsby. But basically these businessmen try to take advantage of the wars that were going on, and they're selling these papers to the American public so that the American public would fund for the war. You can look up that information by reading some of this stuff, and the thing is that you cannot describe it for more than 10 words. So you really have to limit yourself. You can't just copy and paste a whole big paragraph here. So I'm just going to put like bond business is the trade of bonds in order. Oh, see, I'm already over the 10 words. Maybe I'm just going to not put this beginning part. Trade of bonds in order to the buying and selling of bonds. In order to fund the war and other government interests. All right, and that's the end of my video, so you guys can get to work.